Another issue we have with our oil heads is the left cam chain tensioner. If you own an oil head, you've probably heard about people replacing the left cam chain tensioner. You may not be aware of what happens if you do not install the newer style cam chain tensioner like they used first on the R1200 ST. That's what I'm going to show you in this video, is or explain to you what happens and show you how to take a huge shortcut to fix it if you're lucky and you're able to make a repair. So let's get on with that. Here we have two cam chain tensioners. You'll notice the difference in the size of the heads. The original that you would find in your R850, R1100, R1100S, R1150, R1200C, and R1200CL are all like this, or all left the factory like this, with the larger 17mm head. Now you think, big fucking deal, what difference does it make what size the head is? I'm going to show you something. When cam chain tensioner mounts in from the top of the cylinder and presses on the cam chain rail, I'll show you in a moment, be patient. The problem with the stock one is that these have a very weak spring to start with, and they don't have a check valve, so they lose hydraulic pressure as soon as you turn your engine off. This is why every time you start your oil head, especially when it's cold or it hasn't been running the last half hour or something, you're going to hear clackety clack 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 clack, and then it goes away. I'll show you what that is in a minute, but it's related to the cam chain tensioner. The fix is this other cam chain tensioner, which has a 15mm head and a much larger, well, because the head's smaller, the washer's the same size, but you can notice it looks like it has a larger washer on it. You'll notice this does not have a loose spring. This has an internal unit, or an internal check valve. This is assembled as one unit. So when you buy this, it comes as two pieces though. It comes as the cylinder and it comes as the piston. About $90 for this. You only need to replace the upper left. You do not need to touch the lower right. That's inverted, stays pumped up with oil, no problems there. So let's move on for a moment and I'll show you what happens, what can happen using one of the original tensioners. Having studied the diagram, do you see something wrong with this engine? Besides that it's full of dirt. This rail is upside down. No, it didn't come that way. I acquired this engine block many, many years ago. I don't know what happened to it. It appears that someone ran it out of oil or perhaps did an oil change and did not refill it with oil. Doesn't matter. I saved it from the scrap yard for demonstration purposes, this being one. Let me explain. You see this little block here? This should be up top. This is where your cam chain tensioner lives. It would push on the block and push down on the rail, which would push down on the chain, opposite of what it's like now. What happens with these, excuse me, is these don't have a stiff enough spring and they don't retain hydraulic pressure. So in a situation where, let's say you're in 5th gear, you're at 4,000 RPM and you roll the throttle on, you're going up a little bit of a hill or you're on the interstate and you hear this clackety clack clack. Sounds like an old car from the 70s that has pre-ignition because the timing is advanced too far and you're not running fuel with a high enough octane level, so you're getting detonation / ping. That's not what your bike is doing. What is actually happening is that noise you're hearing is the chain rail slapping up and down. Remember, this is upside down. It would normally be going away from the chain and letting the chain get looser. What happens with that is the chain starts to flail around and can break the rail. That's when it really gets ugly. You think, yeah, okay, I'll know when the rail breaks and I'll just stop riding it then and then fix it. You might not know it's broken. What happens with these is they fracture and they fall apart, and all these little pieces end up down in the sump, and it gets in the oil. It gets sucked up by the oil pump sump and it blocks the screen, and then it starves the engine for oil, and eventually it won't run anymore, and you're looking at replacing the engine. So if you were lucky enough to catch it and the rail did break, you still are looking at a considerable amount of time and frustration to repair it, which we'll get into in a moment. So of course the best thing to do is use the upgraded cam chain tensioner. These do have more tension, spring tension to them, and it has a check valve so that it will hold hydraulic pressure. In fact, it holds hydraulic pressure so well that I've taken these out of a bike I've taken one of these out of a bike that had been sitting for like 6 or 7 months, and it still had pressure in it. I had to actually release the pressure. Inside is a tiny little check valve. You're going to go in with a 2.5 millimeter ball Allen driver and push the check valve in and bleed the oil out of that piston, and then you can reassemble it. If you don't, there's no way in hell you're ever going to get the threads on the cylinder to start threading into the engine's cylinder. So you ask, what the hell is involved in replacing a broken cam chain rail? Well, there's 2 ways to do this. BMW says that you need to remove the frame from the engine, remove the transmission, everything else, and basically strip the complete bike until you have an engine block. You don't have to go that far, but let me continue. When you get, by BMW's guidelines, when you get to this point, you're nowhere near done yet. You are going to split the cases, as you may have heard before, common in with discussions about Japanese bikes. It's not really a big deal, but it's pretty fucking intimidating, and people here split the cases and don't know what the hell to do. You're separating the 2 halves, obviously. It's not really splitting anything. But let us continue. So that's what you would have to do with this, according to BMW, is a complete disassembly of this engine and replacement of the cheesy plastic rail. And at that point, I would do all 4 of them. Now you have to consider, how old is your bike? What is it worth? Can you find a dealer competent enough to do this job? Or would you rather tackle it yourself so that you know it's done right? We'll show you what you can do as an option here. Leave the engine in the frame, leave the front altogether. There's no reason to get into any of that. What you're going to do is you're going to raise the rear subframe. You're going to slide the transmission, swing arm, rear drive, torque arm, and rear wheel all off the transmission as a unit, and set that aside. Get someone to help you. It's not heavy, but it's very awkward with the single-sided swing arm. So once you get that off, you're just going to be sitting there with a bike on the center stand with the front of the bike still attached. You're going to remove your clutch pack. You're going to remove the flywheel. Always mark the clutch pack and the flywheel. Take some, I don't know where it went. I have some white out or a paintbrush with some paint on it, whatever you want, and just put a line across, just so stuff goes back together. Once you do that, you're going to need to remove the exhaust. Well, you already have the muffler off if you've got the transmission out, but you're going to need to remove the header. Be careful of the studs up front. Depending on your model, whether you have open exhaust studs in the heads or capped stud nuts, will depend on how easy they come out, but be careful and use your head. Anyway, once you get the exhaust off, you're going to remove the left cylinder completely, and this one has the rod removed already. You don't need to do that. You can leave that rod attached to the crank. You will remove the piston, so undo the circlip from the piston, pull the piston pin, remove the piston. You should be able to handle that. So you'll have the rod hanging here. Put some paper towels or a rag here to protect it. I'm going to show you some pictures next, and then we'll come back to the video. If you look in the left cylinder hole, you will see down here a pin. That pin is going to have a circlip on it. That pin is what the top cam chain rail pivots on. That pivot is located right here. This is where this gets interesting. You're looking at my little headlight here. You see the green dot here? That is the head of the pin. I've already removed it, painted it green, and just to avoid any further confusion, I have replaced the rail in the proper direction with the little stand up. So the next thing we're going to do is you want to grab a punch and a hammer with some weight to it, and we're going to drive this pin. Your bike will most likely, on the end of the shaft here, on the end of this pin, there, the green, will most likely have a circlip on it. If you can't reach the circlip right now to remove it, don't worry about it yet. You'll have some time. We're going to drive that pin forward, and it does clear the fins, but the clip needs to be removed. So you can go forward a little ways before we take the clip off. So let's do the imaginary clip in this case, because it's not on this one. So let's knock this forward. What we're going to do is center onto that pin in the back, and knock, knock, knock. You're watching the end of the pin. Probably about here you should be able to get to the clip, the little circlip on the end of that pin. So since I don't have one on here at the moment, let's say that so at this point you've removed the circlip on the end of our pin that the upper cam chain rails ride on, we can now continue knocking this pin forward all the way. I can assure you yours is not going to go this easy. I've had this pin out, oh, this is at least the 5th time. So it slides a bit easier than it did the first time. So now you can grab either some pliers or a magnet or both, whatever you want to do, but you definitely need pliers. Rephrase that. And this is probably a good stage to take a little safety step, and we are going to put duct tape on here. I'm going to use regular tape rather than waste duct tape, but you get what I'm doing. Just coat this edge with duct tape so that you don't nick the engine block or anything. This isn't going to stick, and it doesn't matter on this because this engine is garbage. This is just for demonstrations. You can continue pushing the pin out. You can continue pushing the pin forward now, but if you're going to do that, I strongly suggest you throw a magnet on it. Hold the cam chain rail. I'm going to back up here. The magnet on the pin, hold the cam chain rail, push your pin further forward. You might need to get in here with a pry bar or a real thin block of wood, something to just hold the front of the cam chain rail. What happens is as you're trying to push the pin through, the rail will turn where it pivots through the pin. So you want to hold the rail into place and then just push the pin. So that's what we're doing here with the pry bar, just as a demonstration. And knock, knock, knock. And now our rail is free, but our pin is still in the cam chain guide. Here's a photo. Your next step is going to be a pair of needle nose locking pliers. I'm going to grab the end of that pin. And remember, it's going to be a little more difficult with the connecting rod in here, but I'm going to have to deal with it. Once you have the pin clamp, you can throw everything away and make a big mess. And actually, I'm in a good position now to reposition this crap and give you a little better view. With the pin secured by the locking pliers, you can go in with a pry bar and push down on the cam chain rail and lift up on your pin, and your pin is now out. And here is the cam chain rail. I do not know the mileage of this engine, but there is virtually no wear on this rail. Now, assuming you're doing this project, it's probably a good time to change all of the rails. To do that, you're going to access, you can see the pin for the lower left rail here, and it has the clip on the end. But you'll see, even if you were to remove the clip, you don't have enough room to slide the chain rail forward enough to get it off the pin. So again, you have to drive it out. This one, again, you'll probably get 10 millimeters or so movement forward with the pin before you really need to get that circlip off. And again, in the back, this one you don't have to take the clutch apart for, or the flywheel. You have, there should be an Allen bolt here. You take that out and you'll see way buried inside is another pin. That's what you drive out. That would take care of your left rails. To do the right side is simple. You already have your punch in place from driving the top pin out. If you pull your punch out all the way, the rail will come out as well. Slide your new rail in, line it up in the hole, which I did not do, and put your punch back in. The lower one, which is missing on this engine, take this bolt out. I forget what was in that hole, but it's got to come out to access the pin for the bottom left. Take this out and the lower tensioner will go with it. The lower tensioner pivots on this. Please note, if you're doing this job because you've already had a cam chain guide rail shatter, now is the time you want to get the pieces out of the crankcase. You might not be able to get all of them. Don't worry. You want one of these tools. You squeeze here and it opens the jaws on the end. A piece of clean paper towel. Get some petroleum jelly. Take a big wad of it. Get it on the paper towel. And then you can get down into the bottom of the engine. As you see, I just lost this one. Lesson for you. Tape the damn paper towel to the tool. There we go. See, I leave little mistakes like this in my videos so that you can learn from my mistakes as well. Try not to make them too often, but sometimes it's inevitable. Anyway, so you're going to dip and dab until you get all the pieces out, or as many pieces as you can. Then you're going to proceed with reassembly. So we have you have your new chain rail. You can set that into place as best you can. Remember, the little tower goes up because our chain guide piston pushes down on this rail. We're going to take the keyway. Remember, the groove goes to the front of the engine. We're going to put green thread locker, one you can actually see. Green thread locker on the pin. Consider this already done. I'm going to get the pin started. You want to line up, make sure this right side upper cam chain rail is in place and being secured by this pin. And then we're going to get to this side, which I'll try to get a better view of here in a moment. This tool also works well for plucking the leaves out of the engine. No, you won't find any leaves in your engine unless it's been sitting outside disassembled for a long time. And if it has, you have bigger issues than replacement of the cam chain guide rails. So here we are. Our upper left rail is almost in position. And now we will push this pin in. don't start wailing on it with a hammer. Might have to move this around a little, the right rail around a little bit more until you feel the pins go into the next part that it goes through. Now we can tap through, make sure we're secured. We are. We're going to go through until we see the pin protrude out of the hole in the case. Oh, right there. Go a little bit more. See, there's what I'm talking about the earlier, about the rail turning slightly on the pin. So again, you're going to need to hold it in place, pry bar in from down here, and you're not putting a lot of pressure on it, you're just giving this rail some support from behind. You can see the tip of the pry bar on the end there. Let's see if I can do this. One more hand would be good. And tap, 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 tap. Got just a little bit protruding out the end. Whack, whack, whack. It's in. Our rail is in position. You can now install your circlip. And you're reassembling the rest of the cylinder head, or the cylinder head, and you get the joy of putting the transmission back together. Remember, if you have a hydraulic clutch BMW, you really should put the modified clutch disc in. Corrects the design defect that strips the input splines and the clutch splines and renders you stuck on the side of the road, going nowhere under its own power. So that's it. I hope this segment was useful for you. This is not a common problem. Cam chain guide rails breaking, not common at all. I have had a few. Like I said, I've done 2 here. I have heard of maybe a dozen more that destroyed their engines. And we certainly had one here. We had an R1150 RTP in the spring of 2013 that had this problem that did destroy the engine. So it's worthwhile thing to do. Replace that cam chain tensioner, and then you don't generally have to worry about these breaking for the life of the motorcycle.